Have you ever stood before the mirror, eyes locked with your reflection, and whispered, "Why am I here again?" The same relationship patterns, the same arguments, the same promises broken to yourself in the quietest hours of the night. There's a peculiar ache in recognizing your own footprints on a circular path, one you've walked so many times that the soil has hardened beneath your feet. This isn't just about mistakes. It's about the haunting familiarity of them, the way they feel like old friends even as they wound you, the way they've become a language you speak fluently, even as you desperately wish to forget the words. We repeat our mistakes not because we fail to see them, but because we fail to see ourselves. There exists within each of us a shadow narrative, a story written in invisible ink across our decisions, our reactions, our instinctive recoils from pain and lurches toward comfort. This narrative wasn't authored in our conscious mind, but in the deep, wordless experiences of our becoming. The child who learned that raising their voice was the only way to be heard grows into an adult who shouts when feeling unseen. The teenager who discovered that achievement brought the love otherwise withheld becomes the professional who works themselves to illness, chasing validation that never quite arrives. These aren't choices we make. They're reflexes we've inherited from our younger selves. Our repeated mistakes carry the signature of our deepest wounds. They are not failures of intelligence, but testimonies to pain that has never been properly witnessed. The colleague who constantly undermines themselves in meetings isn't lacking ambition. They're honoring an unspoken contract made long ago. Remain small to remain safe. What we call patterns are actually protection mechanisms, brilliant in their inception, devastating in their persistence. Your tendency to abandon projects just before completion isn't laziness. It's the echo of a time when success brought danger or disappointment. Your habit of testing relationships until they break isn't sabotage. It's reconnaissance checking if this love, too, will prove conditional. The neural pathways of our recurring mistakes are carved deep by repetition, like water flowing through a canyon. Each time we respond from that wounded place, we deepen the groove, making it easier for future thoughts and actions to follow the same course. We mistake familiarity for inevitability. We confuse what has always been with what must always be. Our mistakes repeat in perfect rhythm with our unresolved traumas. The argument that erupts every holiday, the relationship that ends for the same reason as the last, the diet abandoned at the same milestone, these aren't coincidences, but continuations. They are the psyche's attempt to resolve what remains unsettled, to return to the scene of the wound until someone finally notices the bleeding. The greatest tragedy isn't that we make the same mistakes, but that we punish ourselves for them without understanding their origin. We stand as both prosecutor and defendant in an internal courtroom where context is never admitted as evidence. Why can't I just learn? We demand of ourselves, as if learning were merely an act of will rather than a profound renegotiation with our most vulnerable selves. What if your recurring mistakes aren't failures at all, but desperate attempts at communication from parts of yourself that have no other language? What if these patterns aren't your enemy, but messengers carrying encrypted wisdom about what remains unhealed within you? There is a strange comfort in the familiar pain of repeated mistakes. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote of the eternal recurrence, the idea that one might have to live the same life, with all its mistakes and suffering, infinitely. The terror isn't in the pain itself, but in the possibility that we might choose it, again and again, over the vertigo of the unknown. Our psyches prefer the devil they know. Novel situations activate our threat detection systems, flooding our bodies with stress hormones and uncertainty. But our familiar mistakes? They offer the perverse comfort of predictability. We know exactly how this story ends. We know precisely how this particular pain feels. There is no ambiguity in our recurring failures, only the reliable rhythm of a dance we've practiced countless times. Jung called this the comfort neurosis, the unconscious preference for familiar suffering over unfamiliar possibility. The person who repeatedly chooses controlling partners isn't making a mistake. They're seeking the emotional landscape they've been trained to navigate. The chaos feels like home because it is home, the psychological architecture they learned to inhabit long before they had words for its rooms. We mistake our adaptations for our identities. The defensive postures we adopted to survive difficult circumstances calcify into what we believe is our personality, our preferences, our fate. This is just how I am, we tell ourselves, not recognizing that what we're calling the self is actually a sophisticated defense system designed by a younger version of us who had far fewer resources. The brain conserves energy by automating responses. From an evolutionary perspective, consciousness is expensive. It requires significant metabolic resources. Our repeated mistakes often live in the energy-efficient realm of habit, below the threshold of awareness. We find ourselves halfway through the familiar argument, the familiar relapse, the familiar self-sabotage before we even realize we've begun the dance again. Kierkegaard spoke of despair as the sickness unto death, not a passing emotion, but an existential condition in which we fail to become ourselves. Our repeated mistakes often represent this failure of becoming. We choose the known misery over the terror of authentic transformation. We choose to remain who we've always been rather than face the disintegration that precedes rebirth. The most insidious aspect of our recurring patterns is how they masquerade as wisdom. I'm just being realistic, we tell ourselves as we lower our expectations to match our wounds. I'm protecting myself, we insist, as we preemptively create the very rejection we fear. Our mistakes wear the costume of prudence, of self-knowledge, of hard-earned lessons about how the world works. What would it mean to question whether your most persistent mistakes are actually keeping you safe in some hidden way? What if the behaviors you most wish to change are serving as guardians of your most vulnerable truths? Perhaps your repeated mistakes aren't failures of will or character, but the psyche's misguided attempt to solve a problem you haven't yet consciously acknowledged. There comes a moment, often after the 100th repetition, rather than the first, when something shifts. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet clarity of dawn breaking over a landscape you thought you knew by heart. You catch yourself midway through the familiar pattern, and, for the first time, you don't just see the mistake, you see yourself making it. This is what psychologists call metacognition, the awareness of your own thought processes. It's the difference between being caught in the storm and watching the storm from a distance. This slight shift in perspective doesn't immediately change the pattern, but it creates a crucial space between stimulus and response. In that space, narrow at first, but widening with practice, lies the possibility of choice. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, wrote that, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Our recurring mistakes collapse this space. They eliminate the pause between trigger and reaction, between wound and reflex. Reclaiming this space is the first quiet act of liberation. The awakening often comes through pain, not the familiar pain of the pattern itself, but the deeper ache of recognizing what it has cost you, the relationships that never had the chance to deepen, the opportunities abandoned before they could bear fruit, the versions of yourself that remained unexplored because the old story felt safer than authoring a new one. There is a particular grief in realizing how long you've been trapped in a pattern. But within that grief lies a seed of strength, the recognition that you've survived your own repetitions. You've endured the cycle again and again. This resilience, though forged in the service of a pattern that no longer serves you, can be redirected. The same strength that sustained you through the repetition can fuel the difficult work of change. The awakening rarely happens through insight alone. Intellectual understanding of your patterns, while valuable, isn't sufficient to transform them. The body keeps the score, as trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk reminds us. Your recurring mistakes live not just in your thoughts, but in your nervous system, in the subtle tensions of your muscles, in the unconscious bracing against anticipated pain. This is why true awakening often requires embodied experiences that contradict your deepest fears. The person who expects rejection needs to be genuinely accepted, not once, but repeatedly before the nervous system begins to update its expectations. The one who anticipates failure needs to succeed and have that success acknowledged before the old story begins to loosen its grip. What if the path forward isn't about perfecting yourself, but about befriending yourself? What if the key to changing your patterns isn't relentless self-improvement, but radical self-compassion? Perhaps the voice that has been narrating your mistakes as character flaws has itself been the greatest obstacle to your growth. Beneath the surface of your repeated mistakes lies an untold story of resilience. Every pattern you've developed, even the most self-defeating, began as an ingenious solution to an impossible situation. The perfectionism that now paralyzes you once helped you earn the love or approval you desperately needed. The emotional withdrawal that now sabotages your relationships once protected you from unbearable vulnerability. These patterns weren't mistakes when they originated. They were masterpieces of adaptation. They allowed you to survive circumstances that might otherwise have broken you. They preserved your essential self when more direct forms of authenticity felt too dangerous. Before you dismantle these patterns, take a moment to honor the intelligence behind them and the child, adolescent, or younger adult who crafted them as acts of self-preservation. Resilience isn't always visible or celebrated. It doesn't always look like overcoming or transcending. Sometimes resilience is the quiet persistence of showing up to your life despite the weight of your patterns. It's the courage to try again after the 10th or 100th repetition of a mistake you swore you wouldn't make again. It's the refusal to abandon yourself even when you've disappointed yourself. There is meaning to be found even in the darkest repetitions. The philosopher Camus wrote of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, repeating this task for eternity. Camus concluded that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, because even in the futility of his task, Sisyphus could find meaning through his attitude toward his fate. Your recurring patterns, viewed from a different angle, reveal what matters most to you. The person who repeatedly overcommits and burns out is demonstrating a deep desire to be of service. The one who keeps entering relationships with unavailable partners is showing a profound capacity for hope and a belief in human potential. Your mistakes, properly understood, are distorted expressions of your most noble qualities. Meaning emerges not from perfection, but from integration, the slow, patient work of acknowledging all parts of your experience. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, highlighting rather than hiding the cracks. What if your repeated mistakes aren't flaws to be eliminated, but fault lines to be filled with gold transformed into the most distinctive and valuable aspects of your character? The capacity to witness your own patterns without judgment is itself a profound form of resilience. It represents a kind of inner hospitality, a willingness to make room for all parts of yourself, including those that have led you astray. This self-witnessing creates the conditions for genuine change, not through force or self-rejection, but through the transformative power of compassionate attention. What silent strengths have been developing within you, not despite your repeated mistakes, but because of them? What wisdom have you gained from walking the same painful paths again and again? Perhaps your recurring patterns have been your greatest teachers all along, not because they showed you who you should be, but because they revealed who you already are beneath the layers of adaptation and fear. Transformation rarely announces itself with trumpets. More often, it arrives as a subtle shift in perspective, a moment when you stand at the threshold of your familiar pattern, and for reasons you can't fully articulate, choose differently. Not because you've mastered yourself or achieved some ideal state of awareness, but because something deep within you is ready for a new story. This choosing differently isn't a single heroic act, but 1,000 tiny decisions. It's catching yourself midway through the habitual thought and gently redirecting your attention. It's noticing the familiar tension in your body that precedes the familiar mistake and staying present with that discomfort rather than rushing to resolve it in the old way. It's being willing to feel lost and uncertain as you step off the circular path. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves." Breaking free from your recurring patterns requires this patience with uncertainty. The old pattern, for all its pain, offered answers clear, if limiting, interpretations of yourself and the world. Leaving it behind means entering a space of questions, of not knowing, of vulnerability without the familiar armor. As you begin to interrupt your patterns, you'll discover that what you thought was your personality was actually a collection of adaptations. Beneath the protective layers of your recurring mistakes lies a more essential self, one that has always been present but partially obscured. This self isn't perfect or unchanging, but it's authentic in a way that your patterns could never be. This emergence isn't about becoming someone new, but about returning to yourself. It's a homecoming to aspects of your being that had to go underground while you were busy surviving. The curiosity that couldn't be expressed in an environment that demanded certainty. The tenderness that couldn't flourish in surroundings that required toughness. The creativity that couldn't thrive where conformity was the price of belonging. The greatest revelation in breaking free from repeated mistakes is discovering that you were never actually stuck. What felt like a prison of repetition was actually a chrysalis, a protected space where profound transformation was occurring beneath the surface. Your patterns weren't evidence of failure, but the necessary container for a metamorphosis that couldn't be rushed. This quiet rebirth doesn't erase your history or your wounds. The patterns may still call to you in moments of stress or fatigue. The difference is that you no longer mistake their voice for your own. You can hear the old familiar script begin to play and recognize it as just that, a script, not a destiny. A habit of mind, not a truth about who you are or what's possible for you. What awaits beyond your repeated mistakes isn't perfection, but presence. The ability to meet each moment freshly, without the distorting lens of old fears and adaptations. It's the freedom to respond rather than react, to choose rather than compulsively repeat. It's the profound dignity of authoring your own life, even knowing that this authorship will be imperfect, ongoing, and beautifully human. In the end, perhaps the most transformative truth is this: your repeated mistakes were never the enemy. They were messengers, teachers, protectors, albeit ones whose methods became outdated as you grew beyond the circumstances that created them. They deserve neither your contempt nor your continued allegiance, but rather your gentle acknowledgement as you outgrow their necessity. The path forward isn't marked by the absence of mistakes, but by a different relationship to them, one characterized by curiosity rather than shame, by learning rather than repetition. You will still falter. You will still find yourself drawn to the familiar. But each time you notice, each time you pause, each time you choose differently, you strengthen a new pattern, one of consciousness, of compassion, of genuine choice. There is a particular kind of light that exists only after knowing darkness intimately. It's not the innocent brightness of those who have never stumbled, but the hard-won luminosity of those who have fallen repeatedly and still found the courage to rise. This is the light you now carry, not despite your patterns, but because of what they've taught you about the depth of your resilience and the persistence of your hope. As you continue on your journey, remember that transformation isn't a destination but a practice, one that unfolds breath by breath, choice by choice, moment by moment. The question is no longer, why do I keep making the same mistakes? But, who am I becoming as I learn to walk a different path? And in that question lies not just the possibility of change, but the profound dignity of a life lived in conscious evolution. As the sun sets on our shared journey through these patterns that have shaped us, remember this: your mistakes have never defined your worth. They've simply marked the path of your becoming. In the gentle space between who you were and who you're becoming lies a sacred truth. That transformation isn't reserved for the flawless or the fearless, but for those brave enough to face their own reflection with compassion. Your recurring patterns aren't evidence of failure, but testament to your enduring hope that things could be different. And in that hope, however quiet, however bruised, lives the most profound courage of all. The courage to begin again, to believe again, to trust the dawn after the longest night. This is your story now. Write it with the wisdom of your wounds and the strength of your scars. The world is waiting for the gift that only your particular healing can bring. If this journey has resonated with you in any way, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What patterns have you recognized in your own life? What small step might you take today toward a new story? And if you'd like to continue exploring these depths together, please subscribe to this channel. Each week, we venture into these hidden landscapes of the human experience, not to find perfect answers, but to ask better questions together. Thank you for allowing these words to find a home in your heart today. Your presence here matters more than you know.